Hi, this is going to be a quick tutorial on getting started with the Blender 3D add-on human generator. And the first step is to download and install Blender. I'm using version 3.0. I believe the most recent version is 3.1, so you'll need to Google that if you want to be guaranteed to see the same version as what you're looking at in everything I'm doing here. The next step is to go under Orders on Blender Market if you haven't already and download most of these files. If you open up this installation_tutorial.txt, it just gives you a link to their installation instructions page here, and it's pretty thorough. But so you'll want to download all of the files, HumGen3D v3, as I'm using version 3. All of these with HGCP. You may not need the 8K textures. That's a high resolution version that most people aren't going to need, and it'll slow down your computer to use it. And you probably don't need the old texture compatibility. So the next step is as the instructions say, you download all the zip files. You'll also need to extract all the HG_CP files into, I put mine in my Documents folder on Windows under a folder called Human Generator so that I know where they all are and can browse to them easily. And then you go under Edit and in Blender, Edit and Preferences, and then navigate to your add-ons. And my Human Generator install is currently enabled because I already went through the process of installing it. But if it weren't enabled and I was just installing it, it would look like this, and I would need to enable it. And then I would go in here and select the folder where my Human Generator files are located, where I extracted all those zip files into. And then I'll be able to see my content packs in here. And Blender saves your preferences by default, but you can also save them here if somehow that got turned off for you. So you access the Human Generator panel in the side panel here that you can either access by clicking on that arrow or using the N key as the hotkey to open and close it. And then by default, Blender will open this tool to this panel to the tool tab. I had screencast keys because this is what's showing all of my hotkey actions over here in the side. But then you'll have after you've installed it, you'll have HumGen over here on the side. And there will be a word here, like click here to select. There you go. Sometimes, and this happens in other panels occasionally, I think it's because I demonstrated disabling and then re-enabling the add-on. Some of the panels won't show everything that they have in them until you have made a different selection. So go ahead and try that. And then this stage is just selecting one of their base meshes. And the base meshes are made from actual human beings with different physical traits, skin tones, and shades. And so they're categorized, and there's similar selection under the models marked female. Similar variations. There is some small differences between the ones marked male and the ones marked female. For some reason, only the ones marked male are the ones that you can adjust facial hair besides the eyebrows and eyelashes in. And the ones marked female, you think you can get longer eyelashes and larger chests. So you just need to decide what you want to work on and maybe consider enabling the add-on images as planes to allow you to import reference images right into the scene. Once you've enabled that, it's a built-in add-on. Once you've enabled it, you can access it under File, Export. Did I just accidentally, or import, not export, images as planes. And then you can navigate to an image. I have one in mind, a historical character. Let's see. So I'm going to import that with the default settings. And you'll see that nothing shows up. I'll get to that in just a minute. No, now is good. So the reason why it looks gray, and just so you know, the hotkey to zoom in on or frame an object in your view is when it's selected, either here in the viewport or over here in the outliner, tap the number pad period key and you'll frame it up. The reason why it's gray is because by default, it sets the viewport shading mode to solid, so it saves on rendering so your computer doesn't slow down for no good reason. And so I recommend switching to the material preview mode so that you can see images. The materials don't look identical to the way they would be rendered, but we're not rendering right now, so that's okay. And then to rotate this object, I would tap R, and then without clicking anything, tap X to constrain the R for rotation in the X axis. And then you can type in the number of degrees you want it to rotate. So I'll type in 90 and hit enter. And once the little line goes away, you know you've solidified your action. And let's look at this reference. And there are take into consideration all of the features: the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the chin, the jaw. A lot of these can be adjusted somewhat, but things like the fullness of the lips can't be achieved at their maximum if you start with a base that has very thin lips and other things like that. So you want to start with something as close to what you need as possible. So just for this tutorial, I'm thinking of this character to use as the starting base. And then once we've selected that, we click Generate New Human. And all we've done there, and I'm going to tap the number pad period key to frame up my current selection, which is H.G. Blaine. And that's, I believe, just the name of the actual human that this base mesh is based on. And so if we hadn't switched over to the material preview mode, this is how your human generated human would look to start with. So that's another reason to activate this. These yellow lines are highlighting the armature or animation rig, and we won't need that right now. You can go in and use some of these like helper bones to move around. I'm pressing G to move the character in space, and this is kind of neat. You can move the eyes around left and right, up and down, following this helper. So I just right click to cancel out of any action I don't want to enter or confirm. And I'm using my mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So we don't need pose mode, so I'm going to go back into object mode, and this is kind of distracting to look at. So I'm also going to recommend, for now, turning off the overlays like the gizmos and outlines. And so now you have a better view of this character. But we also want to see the reference image. And you can click on objects in the scene, and their options will change. And so if you're ever missing something like, oh, where did all of my settings go, you might have the wrong thing selected, or you may have changed your selection. So here's the human generator character properties over here in the outliner, which is just a text list of all of the objects here that are connected. So if you select them, you're actually selecting the object. So I'm going to select the image, and I'm going to click G so that I can move it around. And I'm going to kind of put it close to him, but we don't want it going through him. So I'm going to click G and then Y to constrain my movement in the Y-axis. And now we can kind of look at the reference and our character at the same time. So I'm going to go back to our already generated character. And as you saw, like once you're out of this, you can generate more and more characters. I haven't worked with multiple characters at once yet. That's a little bit advanced. So in the human generator panel, when you have your human generator, your generated human selected, your first option is to modify the body entirely. So it kind of groups the whole body and all of the individual scaling options together. And then you can adjust things like the overall height, which is listed as length. I can show that. And another thing is, this warning is just telling me that it has turned off the hair children particles because it'll slow down the viewport if we don't need them in view to like change their color or change the style of hair. So it's just conveniently shutting that off, but you can always enable it again here. But we don't have any hair in the scene, so it doesn't really matter. So under the length panel, I was saying, you can adjust the height of the character here. For my purpose, we're trying to keep everybody the same height so that we can easily swap out clothes and hair and hats. So I don't adjust that, but you can go under the body and adjust all of these things individually, and then below that, you'll work on a smaller scale on the face, the eyes, and the skin details and the hair. So just to give you an idea of what you can see, it's really kind of hard to see the changes made on the neck. You can Control Z to undo any action, but you can also go under the Edit Undo History to see a certain number, excuse my cat, to see a certain number of past actions and undo them from there. But if you, for example, select this point in history and then do a new action, it will undo all of these. So you can Control Z and then Control Alt Z to go forward and back through your history, but anytime you make a change after you've gone back in history, it will overwrite any other changes you might have made after that. Sorry, I think I said that twice. So after you've modified the body, here's another handy tip. So right now we're looking in what's called perspective mode at this character. And you can see I switched with the number pad 5 between orthographic and perspective. Perspective actually warps the view to make it look more natural, like you see to the human eye. So like the closer you get, the more extreme the perspective gets. And the further away, the more it's flattened. That's kind of how the human eye works. But so flipping back between perspective and orthographic is quite a drastic difference, right? The reason why we have orthographic, which is a flattened sort of, it feels unrealistic to artists, but it's actually mathematically proportionally accurate, so that when you make a change, say something is like a hard surface, like a building or something, and you need to make sure that you're moving the front and the back. Maybe you want to scale out the sides of a building object. You want to make sure the front and the back are being scaled at the same time. If perspective is on it, it's going to be harder to tell that everything's moving in identical measurements. For humans, perspective is adequate. But I also like to do what I'm about to show you, open up a second panel, and you can do that by hovering over the upper right-hand corner of a window until you see the crosshairs. And to close that window that you just opened, you can click and drag towards the window you want to close. If you want to open a new window, you can click and drag away from the window you want to open. So now we have two windows open. The reason for this is that I want to be able to look at two view directions at once. So I don't need this tool panel over here, the side panel, and I don't need the tool panel. So I tapped 3 because that puts it in a side orthographic view. And I'm just going to leave this one here in perspective view so that I can check out the reference as I'm going along. But so one of the reasons why I wanted to show opening up this side panel, and every panel in Blender can be opened up and moved around, and every panel in Blender can be another panel in Blender. Blender has all these different layouts for different activities, like modeling and texturing, and you'll get into that later. But so I tend to start with the layout, the basic default layout, and add windows to it as I need. I'm sorry, my computer crashed and I had to rebuild the scene. I guess that's a good opportunity to explain how to find and recover your autosave and your last session. It's not very reliable, so I should be saving more often, and that's my bad. Learn from my mistakes, don't repeat them. So I was explaining how I was modifying my view so that I could get a better look at the adjustments that I'm making, because as you were able to see, the orthographic and perspective views are quite different. And you'll wind up seeing how this comes into play more as you start to make adjustments to individual scaling. And I don't want to weigh down this tutorial going through every single option, so I'm going to try and breeze over this a bit. But as you can see, there are individual controls that you can scale up and down. You can also kind of do an overall adjustment to the tone, I guess, of the overall body. And you can also randomize, which I have never found to be all that handy. So I tend to not use the random on the body. However, it's a little more useful, I've found, on the face. So just briefly, I'll say that the length is actually like the height, and you can type in a value here. You'll probably have to get a calculator. In some, I think because this is an add-on, it doesn't have the same Blender functionality. Typically, you can type in whatever unit of measure you want. Like, you can literally type in 1 foot or 5 foot, 2 inches or whatever, and hit enter, and that will convert to metric if that's what the unit of measure is. But I think because this is an add-on, you have to type it in meters. So if you're more familiar with feet, just Google the conversion and type it right in there. For our purposes, we don't need to be changing the height, we can change the height later through whatever application that we use this character in. So the next step is the face, and just like all of the individual scaling options that you have there are a lot of tweaks that you can make to different individual features of the face. And I'll just scroll through a few of them. This is why I want the other view, because it's hard to see. Like the height of the eyes is like their overall height, and that's kind of similar to like the ears. There's also an overall ear height. Let's zoom this out. And some of these, if you wanted to change the placement of the ear on the head, you would need to adjust both the height of the head overall and the jaw, the length of the jaw. So it's not an independent measurement. It kind of makes sense once you've gone through some of the settings. You start to realize, like, well, if I adjust this, well, then the other thing, of course, is going to change. So use your reference, check out what something does, and see if that applies for what you need. And if not, you can just type it in, set it back to 0, or Control Z or Command Z out of it. This is kind of like in a video game when you go through and you make your player character that you then wind up never seeing. But so for every facial feature, there's different settings you can play with. I guess this is interesting. The tip size has a lot larger range outside of 0 than some of the other values that you can enter in. So I'm not trying to match this reference, but I think, I wanted to demonstrate how you would. And there's all of these other lower face, lower skull, mouth, cheeks, jaw, chin, and like I said, if you got to realize that all of these features are interrelated, and so adjust each accordingly until you have some the facial features that you're happy with or that meet your needs. And then the next setting is skin, and not only can you adjust the skin tone and the skin shade through this menu, but you can also adjust, just like selecting one of the presets. You can also, and here's where that 8K, if you had downloaded the 8K package, it would probably be in there. But again, it's usually overkill at this phase, especially if your work is going towards games or interactive, because the higher resolution your textures, the slower your computer will run when you're using those. And you can get really kind of unrealistic tones, but then you can always go back to more realistic. Randomizing the face tends to have a little more, if you're like just going for generic characters and you aren't trying to make something out of anybody, even though the body randomization doesn't really seem to produce helpful or usable results very often, the face randomization does produce very believable, realistic variations on people's faces. And this is one of the things that really impressed me about Human Generator, is just that the randomization of the facial features are far more realistic than some of the other generation tools that you can do. So again, I'm going to go under Edit, Undo History, and go back to my random because I like those features. Although, again, I'm not going to try and match our reference. I just wanted to show you how you could put a reference in the scene and use it. So here's another setting under Skin, and it's not like, it can kind of borders on unrealistic once you get to the extremes, but it can add a little bit more texture to the face that's a little more realistic. Or smooth it out to a point where it's really not. So 2 is pretty good. Unless you really want to emphasize some things. If you want to make the character, if you want to age the character, there's age settings down here. So I guess I would go back and forth between these. The roughness multiplier value, this is unconnected socket 1.3, but I can definitely see an effect on it, and I don't think I would have a use for this. So I'm just going to set it back to its default value. There are other ways to adjust the roughness or glossiness of the skin, and even the eyes and the clothing and so forth. And the higher the roughness value, the more matte and less shiny it is, and the lower the roughness value, the shinier and glossier it is. Subsurface scattering is another thing. Give it a moment once you click it. By the way, anything that's blue is activated, and everything that's not is not. And subsurface scattering is usually for showing light through skin, so you would expect to see it more like on the earlobes or the fingertips, where if a real human being, if light was shining through those thinner pieces, you would see a kind of an amber glow of the light coming through. But it increases, in this environment when we're creating a character, it increases the draw on your processors or graphics card, or both, I'm not sure, unnecessarily, because this isn't the stage where we're animating or recording this. This is just for setting everything up. So I recommend leaving subsurface scattering on. You might have found it hard to see any difference, but if you watch the lips, you can see there's kind of like a warm glow, which is a little bit weird because, like, I don't know, if you can like put a flashlight in your mouth or something, it's pretty rare you're going to see that light shining through from inside the mouth. Yes, you can go with or without underwear, but for our purposes, we're going to be putting clothing on top of the body, and in Human Generator, adding clothing to a model applies a mask to the rest of the body, so that parts that you're not actually showing, the torso, if you have a shirt on, is going to be completely covered. Or not covered, masked away, like it's not going to be visible at all. Light and dark areas is a little easier to see on different skin shades, tones. I always get the two mixed up. And isn't particularly visible in this example. But you can also randomize all of the skin values. And again, that's one that I find useful for if you're trying to create a very like generic character. It does produce fairly realistic results. Freckles, beauty spots, age, all seem to kind of be self-explanatory. The sagging, wrinkles. And again, if you go up and change the normal strength, you can get even deeper creases, but it starts to get, excuse my cat again, starts to get a little out of the realm of realistic. So all of that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's just kind of randomize it back to something closer to our reference. Oh, and beard shadow. Once all of these are set to your liking, you can go to the eye settings, and the eye settings are not only for the eye color, you can adjust those there, the lightness and darkness. You can paste in a hex code, or just, let's see, take down the saturation a little bit. Could be okay. So it's also not just for the eye color and the sclera color, which is the white part of the eyes. It's also where you can find the settings for the eyebrows. And one of your earlier settings may have automatically turned this off because hair is in Human Generator by default is using a particle system, and a particle system is using actual individual hairs. Oops, I'm inside the face. It's using literal individual hairs, and so once you have a few million of those on the screen on your character, it can slow down your computer quite significantly. So for a lot of these operations, the hair children will just be made invisible, and then all you can see is these small guide hairs that basically just show you where you've got hair particles. But you can always turn this on to see what you've got. And so if you're cycling through the eyebrows, I recommend having that enabled. But it's important to note that for our purposes, we won't be using particle eyebrows and particle hair because, as I said, it's very processing intensive. And so what we're going to be doing is disabling the particle effects and adding in lower resolution eyebrows, eyelashes, and hair as needed. But it's still helpful to go through and see the settings. So the starter box, you can click here to select. You might not see every available option until you go down and choose one of the categories. And then let's go back and choose all. And then, well, it's still not showing all categories. You cycle through these, and it can still be helpful for visualization. The options in this section are inadequate, but that's pretty typical of hair in games, unfortunately. And so one of the reasons why we plan on adding our own hairstyles. There's a really serious lack of diverse types of hair in these kinds of applications. Hair length, obviously you can, let's say hair short 0. Some of these fields, even if you hit 1, you can type in additional numbers. I'm not sure if this is 1. Nope, not this one. But like on the face, you can type in, oh no, it's skin. I apologize. In the skin section, you can type in some numbers into the age, the wrinkles, and get deeper effects than the default 0 to 1, the normalized value will get you. So And you can further adjust let me turn that back on again, the hair color for both the eyebrows, eyelashes, and together, and the hair separately. And for the models marked female, they'll be missing this facial hair option. But so you can click on the overall hair and adjust the lightness, the redness, and the roughness, which I don't tend to mess with the roughness because I feel like the default setting works just right. If you want to give an unrealistic look, you can choose a hue along the slider if that's what your need is. But I'm just going to go back to where I started with the hair. At this point, you want to click Finish Creation Phase, and so a lot of these settings are being controlled in the human gen mesh through vertex groups and shape keys and other items that once you are happy with your results, you don't want all of this extra options on this mesh. You want to lock it in. So with the hairstyle and all of the changes that we made to the facial features in the body. So that's what Finish Creation Phase does. You'll see it'll give you a little warning, and then it'll remove some of these keys over here. So now that you have a model looking the way you like, and you have removed some of these extra features, you can still go in and enable the hair children. It is still particle hair at this point, but you can also go in and remove those. In the hair particles, you can literally delete them. In fact, I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to undo that, all 3 steps. Just to show you. So once you have all of the unnecessary settings removed, you can move on to the clothing, footwear, and pose and expression settings. And right now I'm just going to demonstrate that the clothing is not very suitable for any kind of game or interactive that isn't modern, based in modern clothing. But a lot of these default options can be modified to fit a different style. So we can apply clothing to this character and then duplicate it and edit it in edit mode. For example, we can select this shirt, and with our gizmos on, let's see, we can see that we can edit the vertices and the edges and polygons of this directly after we finalize some of these decisions. And we can also paint onto the texture to make the colors and the fabrics more appropriate for whatever era that we're looking at. So to get back to the settings that you were previously working on, just make sure that you are selecting the human generator, Cody, whatever version it is, it'll be over here under HumGen. the collection hum gen will have the figure that you're working on and all of its components. And you can add footwear, and again, there's not a very helpful assortment of these, but these can be edited and not only recolored, but also the meshes can be edited to adjust them. One thing that might be helpful to show here is that to edit like this shoelace color, you can, we don't need this panel right now to edit the shoes, so we can turn it into a shader editor panel. We also don't need this side tab, and then we can click on the shoe and tap the number pad period key to frame up or center the view around the nodes that are controlling this. And I can see quite clearly that this is the color for the, let's see if I can expand this, just the main color of the shoe, the sole color, and the laces. So you can go in here and adjust this and make that different. And then the laces you could make into a different color. So that works. And if you don't like the size of them, this is not the appropriate time to do this, but you can also go under in the edit mode and hover your mouse over a piece of geometry and click L to select all of the linked geometry with the area under your cursor. And for like these laces, we could click Alt S to scale them all up in an equal amount in all directions, and just exit out of edit mode. I'm using the tab button to enter and exit edit mode, by the way, but you can also access that up here. Oh, and at some point, I apologize, my screencast keys got turned off. Onward. So we'll select the human gen model. We can tap N to get back to the right tab. And there are poses. Not useful if you're going to be, probably not useful if you're going to be animating. But again, there's more categories under here than what you see when you just click in this window. You can select base poses and set the model to a T pose, and that makes it easier to export this out to something like Mixamo and have the character animated through motion capture, recorded motion capture. And the expression has two modes. One click means that you can just select from one of these expressions and apply it. And go into all categories. Some of these are just a little too ridiculous and not really all that helpful. And go back and make this a 3D viewport again. But some of them are quite handy. So this would be good if you're just like trying to do a render and you're trying to capture an expression. And again, you can always turn on the hair. And randomize, which can have some weird results. And neutral. I kind of take issue with their categorizing of some of these expressions as neutral. And sometimes it seems like once you've randomized, you can wind up having it freeze up. But there's also individual controls. So blink. These are all of the keyframes that are being applied to the mesh. You can increase the whatever that is. Let's open this panel up. Concentrated. Okay. I'm talking. And well, you get the point. But each one of these different expressions has a different set of options that you can toggle from the base. And I think that's it for this tutorial. Next, I want to go over baking the textures to all of the objects in the scene. I think one thing I wanted to show you is what I was talking about with when you apply clothing, it masks off certain parts of the body. And that's an optimization feature, which is great, so that your computer's not trying to render stuff that isn't even visible. And I'm hiding and unhiding with H and Alt H. Oh, here we've got some color options right there in the human generator panel. I didn't realize that. But so play around, explore. Like I said, next I want to get to baking the human generator textures, because currently all of the textures are in those shaders real time, and there's a lot of effects like the tie color and the shoelace color that won't translate if you put that object, if you just exported this straight up into a game engine like Unity. Some of those changes wouldn't stick. So you do an operation called baking the textures, and those settings are in these next panels that we'll get to. And then once you've baked your textures for the skin, the hair, the eyes, teeth if you need them, and clothes, then you can go in and start painting on these textures. So we could, just do a full recolor of different clothing items, or we can dump a color on them, or we can draw on them. And then we can also go in and again model, sculpt, and we can even do some cloth physics to resimulate how these clothing items would fit on the body. So I want to go over that in a second additional tutorial. And I also want to show how you can import and edit clothing from other sources to make it fit on your model. So thank you for your time. Hopefully this was helpful.